To all of you present here. I, Dr. Megha Singh, Assistant Professor, Department of English, welcome you all in today's session. It's my privilege to welcome our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Vinita Bhatnagar, our staff members and dear students for the session on storytelling. Now, the question are important: imparting knowledge. Stories define us, shape us, control us, and they make us. Every single culture tells stories. It communicates the physical, intellectual, and emotional aspects of a person in the context of their past or present experiences, which enables a better understanding of an individual. Stories are universal, conveying meaning and purpose that help us understand ourselves better. Stories teach us about life and a unique way for students to develop an understanding, respect, and appreciation for other cultures and can promote a positive attitude towards life. Dr. Vinita, our resource person today, is Professor, Department of Humanities at UIT RGPV Bhopal. She has been a visiting professor at York University, Toronto, and is the author of several books, monographs, and articles. For the past 2 years or more, she has devoted herself to storytelling and told stories such as Begums of Bhopal, Heer Ranjha, etc. Ang Lee said, telling stories is a quest for the meaning of life. The session today will focus on questions such as how stories make us human, the structure and theory of storytelling. Participants are requested to please be attentive and enjoy the session. You can post your questions in the chat box if you have any after Dr. Bhatnagar's presentation. I would now invite our honorable guest, Dr. Vinita, to enlighten and recharge our thought process through her talk. Vinita, ma'am, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to Professor Malhotra and Professor Singh for inviting me because it's a pleasure to be here with young people and to talk about storytelling. Because, you know, with the young people, the stories are yet to be written. The next few decades, you will write your stories. And so I feel that it's better to come and talk to young people and tell them and alert them to how stories get written, created. But I would request that there is active participation. And therefore, if you could put your videos on, that would be lovely because I can see who I'm talking to. Also, I would like to know from you, what are the stories that you remember, love, tell and retell? Are there stories that your grandmothers told you, or stories that you read in childhood? Any story, or maybe in class, in a literature class, or any story. So can you just can somebody unmute themselves and tell me? And meanwhile, I think if we can just be ready for the presentation. So just if anybody would like to share, you can put it on the chat also. So stories, I'd like to know, at least if there are about 30 people here, then 30 stories I'd like to know. What are your favorite stories? Aapki favorite stories kaun si hain? Anybody?
Yeah, girls.
Okay, Helen Keller, very nice. Kriti says, adventure stories. Yashwini likes that, very nice. Okay, more people keep writing it in, and let's talk to Kriti a little. Kriti, would you like to tell us about the Helen Keller story? Why do you like it and when did you read it? Okay, fairy tales, Shikha. Everybody can keep writing, and maybe just a couple of people if you would be ready to speak on what stories you like. So Helen Keller is a good story. Then fairy tales, can you even name which fairy tale? For example, Cinderella or Rapunzel, which fairy tale? So I'm just going to keep looking at these ones. Meanwhile, Gulliver's Travels, thriller, story with a moral at the end. Okay, Aditi. Jungle Book, Aditi Kushwaha. All right. Yes. Fantasy, very nice. All right, you can keep going. Everybody can write down. And if you can name some story, one is to say a genre of stories, but one is to say This particular story really appealed to me. And even though there are teachers here, I know you can be, truthful, and you can tell me if Netflix में या Hotstar में आपको कुछ पसंद आया है ना, या कार्टून्स में, या कोई फिल्म, commercial film that you liked. All right. So if you liked, for example, Dangal, then you can write Dangal. So let me see. Okay, now this is a new one for me, Trisha. A Coat of Thorns and Roses. So I will look at that. Akbar Birbal. Okay, Helen Keller was a girl who was blind and deaf, and she learned many languages. Okay, Hostages at Hotstar. Tenali Rama. Yes. All right, very nice. Yes, okay. So keep going with the stories. And at the same time, I'm going to ask ma'am to put on the presentation, just in case we have a issue later with electricity. Yes. So I'm just going to talk you through the presentation, and then we'll have a conversation about stories. But yes, please keep going with these. The Picture of Dorian Gray. All right. Fantasy and adventure thriller, Alice in Wonderland. Very nice. All right. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the art of storytelling. We are all storytellers. It's not as if I am the person who's the storyteller here. We are all storytellers. Right in the beginning when you were children and your parents asked you, what happened? How did this glass break? You didn't say, I broke it. I mean, that's how it broke. I just picked it up and I shattered it. You told them how a wind blew and a window opened and God knows what happened and the glass broke. So we are storytellers. We are by nature storytellers. And stories are all around us. If you could read this, there's no way to understand the human world without stories. In our newspaper stories, law courts stories, sporting arenas, WWF. I mean, if you think about a story, if there's a straight win, if I'm a very strong player and I play and I win, that's not a story. So I want you to start thinking about what is a story? When do we get hooked to a story? And when do we want to read it? So sporting arenas. So anybody who's into cricket or anything can share that. Our government debating chambers, our school playgrounds, our computer games, the lyrics to our songs, our private thoughts and public conversations, our waking and sleeping dreams. Stories are everywhere. Stories are us. Now, why I want to say this right at the beginning is it might look like a very irrelevant topic. Of course, we are literature people, so for us, not so irrelevant. But, in the world of commerce, it may look like, but people are learning now how to tell stories, leadership stories, how to tell stories to sell your services as to employers. Tell your story, sell your story. How does your CV tell your story? How does your interview tell your story? So learning to tell a story, anyway, we are all storytellers. But when we get alert to the stories around us, and if you read the newspapers and it's the human stories that will pull you, because we are very curious. We're very curious about people. So can I have the next slide, please? Next slide. Yeah. Even when we come to, how does a country define itself? How do we as a people or a community define ourselves? It's a story. We buy into a story, even a family. If there is a family, let's call them the Sharmas. So, but the Sharmas of this place. Now, that story of those people, they're hardworking or they are entrepreneurial, or there is a story that the parents pass on to the children. And that story of who we are. I mean, and I want you, while I'm talking, to start thinking about yourself, your story of who are you? Because ultimately, that's also a story we tell ourselves. Who am I? And so I tell myself a story and the world buys it. I say, all right, I'm a professor at RGPV. I'm a storyteller. That's a story. That's a story that I also am believing in, investing meaning in. And then I'm telling it. And if people get convinced, then that's a story. So there are these stories about ourselves as a nation. What kind of a nation are we? Yes, we are a democratic nation. Yes, and it's good for us to tell those stories. I'm not saying they're lies. Those stories are what keep us together. All right. And that's the reason those stories exist. See, nature is ruthless. What does not serve us, it does away with. There is a reason why there are so many stories and why we gravitate towards stories. So if the next slide, I hope you're reading it at the same time. Of course, it'll be there for you. So I'm going to tell you, for example, this example. Let's go back to ancient Africa, maybe when civilization began. And there are two kinds of people, the story people and the practical people. So the story people like you and I, literature people, we considered, dreamy, fluffy. All right, let's look at what the facts are. So the story people, they go, they work in their fields, they make their money, they come back home, and then, they sit around a fireplace, they gossip. And they gossip and they say, oh, that's what happened. Or when I went there, this was what happened. So the story people talk and they share stories. And the practical people, once they come back, they realize, okay, day is not done. I can do some more work, earn some more money, make some more produce. Who do you think will survive? So you can put it in the chat. Out of these two people, the story people, the last question there is, one tribe will die off and the other will inherit. Guess which one? So one will die. One of these people will die. One of these tribes will die. The story people or the practical people. Which one do you think will die off? And which one will survive? And why? So you can put it on the chat and I'll be very happy if you unmute and speak to me. But if not, then at least on the chat. All right. What do you guess? Let me see what has come up on the chat in the meantime. Silent patient. Yes, Chinman, story people. All right. Anybody else? Why Chinman? Anybody who wants to say no?
Good
The
morning, ma'am.
practical. Yes, please. Yes.
Morning, ma'am.
Good
Ma'am,
morning.
the story people will survive as
Huh.
the people with the practical thinking will
Huh.
think that the end is there and everything will be get over. So story people have imagination and hope for the future, so they will survive.
Yes, that's what I would like to believe, being a story person. Yes. Anybody who feels no, ma'am, the practical people will survive. And you're free to say that also. Very nice question. Very nice comments coming in here. Yes. Yes. Very nice. Absolutely right. Very smart people here. All right. So you're right. And so what happens with the story people, why we tell stories is that from one generation to the other, we pass on knowledge. So I remember my mother used to tell me a story, and I'm sure you've heard it too. And I'm going to tell it very badly because it's unprepared, but it just come to my mind. But I want you also to think of stories that your parents may have told you. And she used to tell me about this magician, this man who spent years learning exotic magic, esoteric magic, and he could do things. And then he learned this, I don't know what is this called, kinesthetic magic, where, he could move things by just thinking of them, just imagining, projecting his mind. And it would take a lot of concentration. And, he led a very ascetic and strict lifestyle, didn't meet people, but he had that much control. And then he went to his childhood friend's place and he said, what have you been doing with your life? You know what I've done? I can control things. And he said, oh, I'd love to see that. So he says, yes, well, I want a glass of water. Now watch. And he concentrated and he thought and the lights were put off and everything was silence. And a glass of water was brought to him. It came magically through the air and he sipped and he drank and he felt very happy. Now his friend was very impressed and he said, you've spent decades. What else do you know? He said, well, it took a long time to learn this. And the friend said, well, uh, oh, that's wonderful. And he said, will you have something? Will you have some tea or whatever? And he said, well, I would like some, sharbat. And then he called out to his son, say his son's name is Rahul. Rahul, can you get us 2 glasses of sharbat? And Rahul got up, ran, got them 2 glasses of sharbat within a second and brought it. And now the friend, Rahul's father, turns to his friend, the magician, and says, this is what I've been doing with my decades. So, both got the glasses. One got of water, one got of sharbat, but one has raised a son, and the son is now getting it from him. Now, I remember my mom telling me this story, and she planted the seeds deep. And so, as she ages and as I age, I grow older, I know that I have to be the son who gets the, water. But at the same time, I have a son now. And so I tell him the story. And, whenever I ask for a glass of water, I tell him, look, I told you the story of childhood. This is what it's all about. This is the magic that we as parents create. So that is what stories are all about. They do, somebody said moral, yes, they do have a teaching inside them. There's a reason those stories exist. And human beings, maybe Homo sapiens, we may be the ones who know, but more than that, we are Homo fictus. We're the humans who create stories. And those who create stories are the ones who survive. I'm just going to keep looking at the chat, and anybody is free to unmute themselves and speak at any time. Yes, story people would survive is sharing knowledge. Most important life lessons, yes, are passed on in the form of stories. All right, can we go to the next slide? So why do we tell stories? So, like I said before, in nature, I mean, in Caltech in California, when they study engineering, one of the things they do is they look at nature and they learn from nature, and they create their submarines and their machines, because nature, evolution is ruthless. And what works, it will keep, and what does not work, it will discard. For example, all of us had tails. Now we just have tailbones. The tails have gone away because we didn't use them. So nature is ruthless and utilitarian, and it goes only for what works. Being such, why have stories survived? Why do they thrive? There is no end of story. I have friends my age who at a certain stage decided it's a waste of time, and they only read nonfiction. And yet I feel still they are drawn. I mean, I tell them, you don't read the novels, but aren't you drawn to the Netflix serials? You're watching those serials, you're watching those stories. Why does nature do that? Why are our brains structured in such a way that they are vulnerable to stories? And once we realize that, how can we use that knowledge? Next slide, please.
Ma'am, I want to
Yes, please, please. Yes. Give
I
your
want
name also, please. Yes.
Ma'am, Shravani. Ma'am, I believe that stories reflecting the contemporary culture and the society's picture it is ever etched in the stories which the next new generations are often or they come to know about whatever had taken place hundreds of years back through stories. It is possible. Otherwise, it's a
Yes.
record of culture.
It's a record, and it's also, as human beings, things may change. I mean, technology changes.
Cultural
We had cinema, we have television, we have radio, now you have the internet. But human beings, as human beings, we are still probably what we were in our caveman days. So if you think of Shakespeare and you think of a play like Othello and the jealousy of Othello, and has jealousy got any less? I mean, don't we still hear of murders precisely for those reasons? Or envy, motiveless malignity like Iago, and has that got any less? So as human beings and as our emotions, things have not changed there. And so when we tell stories, those stories are actually telling us, this will be, in a way, it's like a warning. So very good. Thank you very much for that comment.
connection is developed.
Yes. So now this is the paradox. Aristotle, and I know there are literature students here. So Aristotle says, we're drawn to stories for catharsis, and, we identify, and for pleasure. Now let's look at pleasure. What gives you pleasure? Going to Starbucks and having a butter croissant may give you pleasure, or a boat ride on the lake might give you pleasure. But actually in stories, that's not what gives us pleasure. What gives us pleasure in stories are threats, all right? Death, despair, anxiety, all these negative emotions. For example, when we think of Helen Keller, if she had not been blind, would that story mean as much to her? Priti had shared that, and if you want to talk a little bit more about that, can we go to the next slide? Can we go to the next slide? All right. So before that, if you want to talk about the Helen Keller story, what was the story? What did she write there? On the chat, so it's talking up, you can just put it on the chat. So what happens with the Helen Keller story or with any story which is that character faced, that person faced, and we look at those, and then when they overcome those difficulties, we are inspired, and we know that, look, if they could do it, so can we. Look at that. Yeah. Learning, even though she was blind, and if she can do it and have that motivation, learning, whatever you tell me I will do. No, you will find that she was rebellious, she was frustrated by her handicaps. If you've seen the film Black, it's based on this character who's blind, and then the sibling rivalry, the other sibling who's not handicapped and who resents the attention being paid to. So this is the stuff of human life. These are the lives we lead. And therefore, when we read these stories, it gives us depth and richness and understanding of our own situations. That's the reason we read. Some of you will want to be writers. Some of you hopefully will want to, after the session, say that I want to be a storyteller. Then that's why we tell stories, and that's why people listen. When they have something they can learn from. All right, so let's look at the deep structure of stories. And at the heart of a story, no, same one, please. Say earlier one, please. Deep structure of stories, yes. So all stories follow deep structural forms. Now, of course, as literature students, we study those that break that form and experiment. But if we look at a normal detective serial, a romance novel, there is a structure to it. And the structure to that is you have a complication, a crisis, a resolution. So what happens is, and again, I want you to think, because these are all things that, if you are going to write your own story, there is somebody called Joseph Campbell, and he writes something called The Hero's Journey. And he talks about that what happens in the beginning is we are called to a quest. All right. There is something that will give our lives meaning. That is called the quest, the hero's quest, Quest. So if you think of somebody like Mother Teresa when she was staying in Albania, and as a person, and the call comes to her to become a nun, to become a missionary. But she resists that call. She doesn't immediately give in. She doesn't. So normally that will happen. Then somebody comes along who guides us. Then we set off on our quest. But when we set off on our quest, we don't easily get it. It's not like I set off and I got what I wanted. No. What happens is we go through hell. And once we've gone through hell, we come out of that. And then we've come back to our community. And when we come back with a lesson and an example. That is the hero's journey. If you think of Shri Ram, he was a prince. He was to become the king of Ayodhya. It was declared, tomorrow he's going to take charge. And then something happens. So what is that something that happens? Kaikai asks for a boon, and he is banished. So now he is banished. He's in the forest. All the people are now he's no longer in the kingdom. He doesn't have his subjects. He doesn't have his servants, doesn't have his riches. He's lost everything, but he has his wife and his brother with him. Is that enough? No, he must go through hell. So what will happen? His wife will be taken away. His wife will be taken away, and now he has to find her. Now, when he has to find her, he has to make allies. So, he grows with that adventure. And what I'm trying to say is that every character, this is one of the things that the whole idea of the quest, when we have something in our heart that we want to do, it changes us. So he grows and he makes allies. And with those allies, he attacks finally Lanka. And even then, if there's a moment, if you remember, his brother, his beloved brother, is unconscious. So there are low points to that. And ultimately there is victory. And then he comes back to Ayodhya. Now the Shri Ram who left Ayodhya and the Shri Ram who's come back to Ayodhya has gone through a whole series of experiences. And that's the hero's journey. That's the quest. Now, the question I'm putting to you right now, and you can answer it later after this presentation's over, is what is your life's quest? What is it that you want in your life? What is it that you are looking for? What will give meaning to your life? So write that down. You don't have to share it with me, but at least to yourself, you should know what is my quest. And I will share with you if you ask me, then what is my quest? But only what you ask me, I will answer. Let me tell you that. All right, next slide, please. All right. So then when I said that nature is ruthless and nature is utilitarian, and therefore why stories and why do they survive and thrive? Because they are like flight simulators, or those who've learned driving, like, those simulators. They teach us before those situations come to us in our life, they teach us how are we going to deal with them. All right. So we go through those emotions that the character goes through. We go through those problems. We feel everything, and yet we don't have to pay the price. And then we are faced with that situation. That story comes back to us. All right. And it helps us to deal with that situation. And therefore, our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents, they equipped us for living by giving us these stories. They tried to put something they may not live on to help us at that time, but what they taught us lives on in these stories. So there will be stories that your grandparents told you, I would love to know those. Parents told you, I'd love to know those. But there will be stories that, are spiritual parents. Sometimes there are people who they don't belong to me, but I read them. Simone de Beauvoir, I'm reading now, Coming of Age, and I feel that she's speaking to me. Now, she died long ago. She was in France, didn't know who I am, but still, there are the stories come and they teach us something. They teach us how to deal with things. So, for example, just before the pandemic happened, I was all set to tell a story of, Ma, the Aurobindo Ashram Ma at Pondicherry. And to tell that story, I was reading up her history and, her biography and her writings. And this was just before the lockdown and everything. We didn't know it was going to happen. But one of the things I learned through that was that 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu and a great number of deaths. And 2 years it lasted in India. It lasted 2 years. So, when it was uncanny because you had, and Aurobindo's wife died actually of that Spanish flu. She was staying somewhere else. She was coming to Pondicherry. She went through the train stations, and now we know that all these places of travel are the worst, the most infectious, and she passed away. Now, for me, that story became like the warning of what is going to happen, and how careful I should be, and and that it will last. To have the patience and the resilience to last out 2 years. It's not going to get over in 3 months or 6 months. It might last 2 years. So that's what it's like, one mind speaking to another. The person goes away, but the mind remains, the words that they have left behind and the stories that they have told. All right. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Even our dreams, I don't know if you've noticed, but when we go to sleep, our dreams are so strange and they tell us stories. Our mind is constantly telling us stories. Like I said, my mind may tell me a story. I'm a professor, I'm a storyteller, I'm a, this, I'm a that. It's a story. Choose the stories that empower you, but know that they are stories. Don't let it get to your head and don't get arrogant. These are stories that you choose. You know how that in that film, which film was that? Uh, Three Idiots. And in Three Idiots, there is this lesson is all is well. That's a story. Tell yourself that story. It doesn't matter what is happening right now. Things will work out. It'll all be fine. It's a story. Tell yourself that story. But when we get anxious or depressed, when we're anxious, we tell ourselves the story, it's all going to go wrong. I'm going to fail. I haven't studied. This is a story that we're telling ourselves. Or when we get depressed, it's hopeless, I'm powerless, I can't change anything. It's a story that we're telling ourselves. Tell yourself the right stories. Tell yourself the stories that fill you with joy and which fill you with courage. I mean, if there's a problem, you're going to find a way through it. There's a reason why God's put that problem there. All right. So remember that. And even our dreams at night. And those dreams will always be of very, of the things we fear most. Very scary dreams. Those will come to us in the night, which doesn't mean that, they're going to come true. It's just a warning, alerting you. Wait, there's a message there. Your subconscious is trying to tell you, listen, pay attention to, this could happen. So be careful. All right, next, please. Ink people changed the world. Now, who are the ink people? I'm not just talking about writers, but characters sometimes in novels. And again, I would like you to think about that. Which character has impacted you and why? What did you get from them? So, for example, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, Abraham Lincoln's feeling of, uh, doing away with slavery. Or the Diary of Anne Frank, a lot of books have been written on the Holocaust, but when a young girl writes to you and you know that it's a diary, it's a very direct journal, and you know that this girl passed away because of this Nazi oppression, that changed history, that's changed our perceptions, that's changed Jewish history. All right. So ink people, characters in novels, they're created by the writer, but those characters live on beyond the writer. And, they kind of change our perceptions, change the world. All right, next one, please. Next slide. And then this thing about the life story. Now, frankly, as of now, I tell only folk tales or, traditional tales. It's very difficult for me to tell a life story because for a life story, I have to turn inward and, my attention is more outward. I'm extroverted. I love people around me. I love things happening, color. But life stories are extremely powerful too. We recently listened to somebody who was talking about a daughter who was suffering from blood cancer and how the mother turned to Rumi and to reading Rumi's Masnavi in order to deal with that. And how whenever she has a problem, she opens the Masnavi and it seems as if Rumi is talking to her. Now, it's a very powerful thing when people tell their life stories. And that's why again and again, I'm saying I would really love to know. So our life stories are who we are. And it's a personal myth. As I said, think of the quest you are on. Think of who you are in that quest. Think of your character. Your character is on CinemaScope in 70 mm. I mean, huge. So think of that. Think of yourself as that, and it'll help you deal with things. It will help you have courage and resilience. And ambition, definitely. What is it that you want to do with your life? And then when difficulties come, you have to remember, did any story happen without difficulties? Didn't every character that I have admired, didn't he have to go through hell, lose everything in order to become the person he was destined to become? So something on the other side of that story is the person that I'm meant to be. All right. So let me go through the story with lots of courage. All right. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes,
That when we are telling the story in a fictional way or in a thriller way, we can put on the attire and make a plot of it and give somewhat idea to the listeners. But ma'am, when we are giving the life story, so ma'am, how can we make it more interesting and appealing?
Okay, very good question. And a question, frankly, who's the person who's asked? Sorry, what's your name?
Ma'am, Ajit Kaur.
Ajit, a very good question. And Ajit, to be very honest with you, this is my struggle this month. Next month, I'm going to try to tell a life story. And it's very difficult for me because for many reasons, I don't like to turn inwards. And when I turn inwards and I do tell that story, I have told it a couple of times. I've told stories a couple of times, but I have not felt that connect with the audience. So Ajit, I think what it's about is that, we face universal problems. And if I tell a story in such a way that Ajit feels, yes, this has happened to me. Oh, yes, I can identify with this. Oh, yes, there are people like this. So if you listen to stand-up comedians, sometimes they'll be cracking jokes. And the funniest are those you can relate to, actually. That, yes, this happens. A lot of times I ask my son, why do they always make jokes of their moms or aunties? But, by young people, probably you're harassed by your aunties. All right. So when people can relate, so you've got to keep that audience in mind also. But when you tell your story, and there is a structure to a story, and think about why will anyone listen to you, Ajit? So when they listen to you, yes, they need, ultimately, what is their purpose? They want to learn something and they want to grow. And you're going to say, but in my life, nothing's happened like that. It's not true. It's happened in everybody's life. I mean, I could ask you to talk about who's your role model? Who's the person you want to be most like? All right. And then there would be a story that all of us can learn from. So, Ajit, does that answer your question? So you have to structure it. Think of it. I mean, I'm going to be very conservative about this. Think of it as a 3-act play. So there is a normal. You're in a normal situation. A crisis comes. When that crisis comes, you deal with that crisis, so the changes that come, and then the conclusion or the resolution, or you're learning from it. All right. Once you begin to see that in your life, and it has happened, all of us have had something like that. Somebody has asked me, what is your quest? So I will share it with you right after this. But so life story. And Ajit, this is the most
Excuse me,
fruitful,
ma'am.
actually. Yeah. Yes. Question? Yes.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Ma'am, my question is, does the story need to have a meaningful moral always? Does it have to be meaningful always, or it can just be a simple story?
It can be a simple story. In fact, never do you tell a story where the moral is very obvious. Where you say, the moral of the story is, people get put off. Even you would get, if I tell you, you must work hard. I mean, you've heard that n number of times. So story doesn't definitely have to have meaning. No, Chunman. It could be a story. Can you think of a story? Can you give me an example of a story that you feel has no meaning to it? Any story? I mean,
Ma'am,
if
I
suppose,
think stories are put up
Ma'am,
for
not
meaning and a successful end, or an certain end where we think that okay, this is the final decision for the story.
huh, you like that or you don't like that?
Ma'am, I really like that because if there is no end, we will get more and more curiosity that, and it will be of no use if there is no end in the story.
Ajit, sometimes now, especially in the postmodern thing, we leave it open and we leave it to the reader to create endings. And sometimes we have alternative endings. This story could have ended like this. This story could have ended like this. If we have time, I will tell a very traditional story that I'm sure Ajit would know. A lot of people will know. But we'll think about what could have been the endings, what could have been the characters. But the question that she's asking is, absolutely, you can have a story without meaning. You can have art without meaning. Absolutely. But the best stories, the stories that stay, we are meaning makers. As storytellers, we are meaning makers. And we are also meaning seekers. If there is no meaning outside to our lives, to our activities, we are the ones who invest meaning. All right. So when we invest meaning and communicate meaning, something in our brain gets satisfied. Then there is a deep satisfaction, like Ajit is saying, at the end, there's a deep satisfaction, emotional satisfaction. It's like you go दावत खाने जाते हो, आप कहीं वो चाट खिला देते हैं आपको, लेकिन चाट के सिवा कुछ नहीं था, तो आप कहते हो हाँ खाना तो अच्छा था, गोलगप्पे था, लेकिन वो एक डीप सेटिस्फैक्शन जो आपने ये भी खाया, फिर ये भी खाया, फिर डेजर्ट भी खाया, फिर ऊपर से कॉफी भी पी ली, अब लगता है ना कि हाँ पेट ठस बिल्कुल. सो वही वाली फीलिंग है that we are meaning seekers. But you can definitely, Chunman, you can have stories that do not have to have a grand meaning. Why not? All right. And definitely, even afterwards, if you can send me, people can send me their favorite stories. And if you send me stories that give you pleasure, that have no deeper meaning, fine. No problem. No problem with that. All right. Next slide, please. And so I don't believe that the future of story is finished. I don't believe the future of literature is finished. When novels came along, people said that novels are draining everybody, especially the women. They're reading the novels. Morals are getting. There was an earthquake. People said it's because of Tom Jones, the novel. So then comes along cinema. So when cinema came, people said, oh, cinema is bad. Cinema is ruining morals. It's doing this, it's doing that. Then came television. The television is bad, it's doing this, it's doing this. Then came cable. Now we have the internet. So every time any change comes, we all keep saying, this is bad, this is bad.
Ma'am, I have a question.
We have an insatiable need for story. And this will continue forever. The story of this year that we have all lived through together, the pandemic, it's a story that we will tell for many years, because there are so many parts of the story. For example, the embrace of technology. I mean, that was one, but there's so many parts. I mean, you could choose whatever you want to tell of that story. But someday, hopefully, if you've seen the Titanic and that old lady, who saw the sinking of the Titanic. So someday, somewhere, you will be asked, how was it when the pandemic took place? And, how did you manage and what did you do? And so people will want to know that story, because that has learning for them, interest for them. And so the future of story is immortal. Stories will live forever. They will take different forms. And of course, some of you are into gaming. So if you can tell me about games and stories, that'd be interesting, because I don't know that much about it. But stories will continue. There is not going to be, the death of story is not going to happen. The death of the author, Barthes declared long ago, but the death of story is not going to happen. Okay, next slide, please.
Ma'am, I have a
Yes, and sorry, in that slide that just got over, you can turn off the slide now and we can take questions before we go on. Yeah, in this, that there is the mass exodus. We talk about migration, and I think in this year, the migration has been online. We've all gone online. Even this class is happening online. I mean, the session's happening online. So, and once we've gone online, I don't think, so, I read somewhere they were saying reality is going to be really hard to deal with, because it's so neat, clean. You can have a nice, everybody looks nice on Zoom, and you can, reality by itself. I mean, once you go after this and you go to MP Nagar and you walk on the streets, on the alleys, and somehow reality can't cope up with the virtual world. So I don't know if people will ever, how many people will be attracted back to reality. And so the future of story is very bright. All right, so we can end the presentation and we can continue with the session. So all the questions you want to ask, I'll be happy. And we'll look at the time and then decide if we are going to do some stories also. But first, yes.
Ma'am, I wish to ask you.
Yes.
As a new story writer, absolutely new person in the story field. How should I develop a platform with my reader, like a common platform where he finds, he can identify himself with my writing? It is not something that should interest me only. It should be, I should enter into his intellect, and my reader should be my concern. So how should I develop that structure? That is what I want to.
I'll give you the answer by giving my own example. You want to be a writer? I still want to be a writer. It's been my childhood dream. And one of the things that happens, one second. So one of the things that I've learned, Shabani, late, and I hope that you learn it early. This has happened to me really late. Because I studied literature, I was at Delhi University, and all the form and experimentation and language and syntax and style and semantics and everything. So I have been writing constantly, and people would not be drawn to that. I mean, even you need the publisher to publish, right? So they would not be drawn to that. And so very, very recently, I realized there's an old saying, but somehow it never made sense to me. They say, write what you know. And that for me has been a very difficult thing, because what you know means what you yourself have experienced, and we feel our lives are so boring. I mean, who would want to read this? So, but I would suggest to you, be honest. If you see somebody like Rupi Kaur, I mean, she's really big now, but people are reading her because she is honest with her emotions in her life. This singer, I forget, but I'm not really into music, but very famous singer. She writes these stories, these songs about her breakups, and how she feels betrayed in love and things like that. And people love that. So when you write about yourself, don't, in the first place, don't be dishonest and don't try to write for the audience. This has been a hard lesson for me to learn, but easier for you. You start young. Write what you know, first of all. Secondly, read a lot. Your psychic resources should be rich. If you've read a lot, you've thought a lot, reflected a lot, then write it. The advantage now is that you no longer need to get a conventional publisher to publish you. Even your own Instagram or your own Facebook page or whatever, you can start publishing. And that's one of the things I've decided to do. And friends will read it, that's fine. Somebody's reading it. When I tell my own story, in a way, you become the reader, right? You're a listener, but you're a reader. So I write that story, I tell you, you're like my reader. So what I suggest is keep writing. Make sure you write every day. Write a journal, observe and write down what you see, what you smell, what you see. Be very receptive to things around you. Write them down. Be observant. Write your stories. Then try them out on your friends. Try them out or on other people. All right, and then send them out to magazines which are publishing. In India, we have very few that actually publish stories. But why I'm telling you this, Shabini, is that what happened is I find it very difficult to look inwards, as I told you, and backwards to the past, which makes it very difficult for me as a writer. But finally, last to last year, just 2019, 2019, I then wrote my mother, because my mother keeps talking about her past, Nainital, and how she grew up, and the wild fruits that used to be on the bushes, and how they used to walk to school, and she would come back, and her mother at the window, all these things. She had gone on and on. So her story was inside me. And so when I wrote a story and I serialized it, that got published. Because for the first time, I was writing what I knew, my mother, who I love, not only what I know, but what I love. So I was writing my mother's story, but I was also writing in a way my story. And in a way, if you say the moral of the story, well, at the end of the story, the whole thing was, I wish my mom would stop looking back and would look around her, and she might see me. So many things will come out of your own experiences, emotions, characters that This is a new thing I've learned and realized. When I try to create a character, doesn't happen. But again, I'll tell you another example. Where I was writing something, we were writing together, we based it on a character that we do know, but we don't know him well enough. So we just somehow, with our intuition and everything, we said this person has a temper, whereas this person actually behaves very well. One Uriah Hoop. And then when we went to meet him, he actually said, I get so angry, I throw dishes. And we were looking at each other. Two of us were writing it together. And we said, somehow we knew that. So you have an intuitive mind. You know so many things. Generations have gone into you. So use that mind. So write every day, write a journal, write every day, have faith in yourself as a storyteller and a writer, and keep writing. You are a writer. You write, you're a writer. You don't need XYZ to declare you a writer. You are already a writer. So please go ahead. I would encourage you, and especially your story, I cannot tell. If I try to tell a story now about being young and in college, I can't. There's so many things I've now forgotten. So write at whatever stage you're in, write those stories. Friends come to you, people are telling you something. Write those stories, change the names, but write the stories. Okay. Anybody else wants to ask something?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, my name is Sakshi Rajput.
Huh.
And ma'am, I had done lots of virtual work like freelancing, data scrapping in lockdown period. And ma'am, I earned quite well at that time. So ma'am, my question is there any virtual platform to take storytelling as freelancing, or how we can take storytelling as a career option?
Okay, Sakshi, first I'm going to go back and ask you a question. When you said that you did virtual work, what did you do exactly?
इसका बंद कैसे
Ma'am,
साउंड
like
बंद
data
कर दूं
scrapping, email scrapping, or ma'am, I made logos
साउंड बंद
also.
कर
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to know. Wonderful. So, there is storytelling. There is a place
अरे
I can put that down, which is Geeta Ramanujan. So I will just first I'll just write it down. All right, Kathale. There are other places also, but this is the most well known. So what happened is this whole storytelling revival actually started from USA, and there is a Jonesboro festival. So they have a storytelling festival. It's quite big in USA. They have much more storytelling societies, and they have newsletters, and they have events happening. All right. Kathale, so Geeta Ramanujan went there, experienced that, started this, and has trained thousands of people. So this is in Bangalore. Now we also have a Federation of East Asian Storytellers. So you join that, you have webinars. Even if you go online and there are, depending on what kind of stories you want to tell, you can actually look them up, you can learn from them. There are story swaps. You can choose to go to a story swap, tell your story, get feedback. So it's becoming, in India, we have a whole lot of storytellers now telling stories. So that's one side of it, but I'll be very honest with you. The other side of it is, has society so far recognized it in India at least? Will you get paid for it? So can you make it a profession? As of now, no, you cannot make it a profession. All right. So that's a problem. Okay. Any other question?
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
Ma'am, how can we make the audience immerse in a story?
Yeah. How can we make them immersed? How can we make them immersed in the story? By being immersed yourself. I'm not a gifted storyteller, so I have to work hard at my stories. I wanted to tell you a story today, but my problem is this: I have to work at things for a month at least. So, for example, recently I told Heer Ranja, and I had suggested that you even look at that. But for that, for at least a month or even more, I was listening to Heer songs is one thing. I saw multiple translations of that story is another thing. So you rely, when you rely on folk tales or fairy tales or traditional tales, you have the text, so you can take help from that text. But with that, I have to mine deep inside myself to see which emotion plays for me. And one of the emotion that played for me was, I've constantly had friends who were much smarter, more energetic, dynamic than me. But then, say if they passed away or something like that. So that emotion is what I played with, that as a friend who's talking about another friend who I hero worship, who has everything that I don't think I have, and yet her story, so her tragic story. So I put myself in the character. And so people felt that emotion. If I felt it, they felt it. So one of the things is, when you feel it, people will feel it. You have to feel it first. So not only that, it's also creating that, the space, the place, the textures, the colors, the smells. All right. When
Yes, ma'am.
you can make
Uh,
the reader see that, or the listeners see that, then they will begin to be immersed in the story. But it's a very good question to ask. More and more immersive, more and more participative stories are the need of the hour. Yes.
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I
Yes.
saw that episode of yours in
Huh.
which you are in the full attire and you're giving the background as well to give the full feel of the story, and
Yeah.
with all the emotions that, oh, that's the person, and with like proper background of it, like in the people in
Hmm.
that time used to talk that way.
Yeah. And the thing is,
And that will be
even the
more
costume, like in Zoom, you can just have this much. Yeah. But even the costume, when I'm wearing the full costume and it's rubbing against my legs, I can feel it now. I have to believe it first. So in a storytelling session, you don't actually have to be dressed. But I choose to do that because that makes me more and more, the more deeply I am into it, the more I can take you there. So that's the
yes,
feelings.
more and more people can relate to it when we are
Yeah.
relating to the topic.
Yeah. And at least I should be honest now, even if you cannot relate, but I should have been honestly trying. So I think that that's very important. But it's a very good question. And because you're all into, I'm really trying to look at how technology can help me in storytelling, make it more immersive, more participative. How can I make people feel like they're characters in this? So more and more immersive and inclusive. Yes. Any other questions? All right. First, I don't think there'll be now time for me to tell you a story. I want to ask you actually, and you can put it on the chat. What is the thing that most scares you? What is the thing that most scares you? So you can put that into the chat, and I will tell you a story very quickly in 5 minutes because Shikha has asked. Darkness, very good. Oh, I would love these answers. Darkness, keep going. I need, if there are 55 people now, the 55 people, I want 55 answers. But I'm quickly going to tell you a story because Shikha has asked, but it's not a story that I've rehearsed or immersed myself in or anything. So please now, I will tell you. And of course, this is more for boys. It would be more for boys, but I will tell you the story. Maybe the lesson is for all of us. So there was a young boy. This is an island, or Scotland, I think, Scotland. And, this is during the previous time. So they used to date, in the sense they would dance and meet and choose their mates and get married. It's a farming community. And so this boy, he's not into all that and he's lost in his own world. And his friends come to him and say that, come, you better come. And, there's a dance being organized. So you come and we will all meet girls and, so he goes there. He's not really interested, but, and, all the boys are shy. So they are all on one side of the room and the girls are shy and they're on the other side and the girls are talking to each other and the boys are acting as if they haven't noticed. And then he notices a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous. Think of the most gorgeous, I don't know, you tell me, but she's tall and stately and her nose is, aquiline and up in the air and she has these golden curls. And he just looks at her and his heart does dub, 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 dub. And then he looks around and he realizes all the boys are looking at her. So he says, before they ask, I should ask. So he runs across that hall and he asks her, will you dance with me? And maybe she's startled because, suddenly out of the blue, it takes time, but here's this boy. And so she says, yes. And they begin to dance. Now, when they dance, he's just so aware of everybody envying him. He's so happy. He's dancing with the most beautiful girl in the room. And, she doesn't speak much or he doesn't speak much, but it doesn't matter. He's just lost in how beautiful she is. And she smells of some exotic perfume and her hair is freshly washed and her clothes, she looks as if she's a princess. And so they meet each other and he takes her home to meet his father. He, wants to talk about, because he's an honorable guy, he wants to talk about marriage. So he takes her to meet his father and he says, supposing her name is Alexia. So he says, father, this is Alexia. And his father says, oh, forget all that. You sit down, Alexia. And he tells his son, let's call him Rupert. He tells Rupert, you go to that rock and move it. There's a heavy rock, boulder at the end of the garden. Rupert looks at him and says, what's wrong with him? That doesn't need to be moved and I can't move it. But the father says, come on, quickly, go and do it. So Rupert goes there, tries to move it, do anything, nothing happens. His arms are aching, his tears are streaming down his face. He's trying, he's sweating. And his father turns to Alexia and says, do you want to marry a boy who's so weak? And she looks at him, Rupert, and his father, and she says, nah. And she goes away. Now Rupert is like, what? What is my father doing? See, my enemy, what does he want? He doesn't want me to marry. So he doesn't go for any dances. He shuts himself up in the room. He says, I'm not going. My father, दुश्मनी बैठ गया यार, शादी नहीं होने देगा. Now his friends come, they say, Arey yaar, forget it, don't worry about it. I tell you what, you exercise. Next time you move that boulder, your father will be fixed. He says, okay. So he exercises, picks up weights, exercises. And then he goes again to a dance. And at that dance, again the same scenario. The girls on this side, boys on this side. This time there is a girl, she's sweet looking, she's nice looking, looks more accessible. He thinks about it. His friends are asking people, he's just worried because of what his father did. And then he says, all right. She goes up to and says, will you dance? And she looks around and then she says, all right. So they dance and they talk and it's a better conversation. And then they begin to meet and he's an honorable boy. So he takes her home to meet his father. And he says that this is Tracy. And his father says, all right, Tracy, sit down. He says, yeah, again, he's going to start. And he says, go there to the end of the garden and move that rock. So this time, Rupert says, I've got him this time. I've exercised. My friends were right. He doesn't want me to get married. Goes to the end of the garden, takes that rock, starts to move it, and it moves. So he's very happy. And he says, Dad, I moved it. He says, okay, then pick it up and bring it here. Ah! Rock down on the floor again. And then that girl is looking at him. He's looking at his father. And the father looks at the girl, Tracy, and she says, Tracy, do you want to marry a boy that's so weak? And she says, no, I'm sorry. And she leaves. Now this boy, he's totally depressed. He locks himself up. He just refuses. I am not going to do anything. My father wants me to stay a kuwara. I'll stay a kuwara. I'll stay in this room. This is what he wants. No? Will not go out, will not do anything. Father is basically laughing and saying, ha. Now the friends come to him again. They say, okay, I tell you what, there's a dance. You come, you don't ask anyone for a dance. Okay, don't ask, don't dance. Just stick to us, talk to us. Come with us. So he goes. And when he goes, again, the same scenario, the girls on one side, boys on one side. Now he turns his back towards the girls. He's not going to, what's the use? His father's going to bhagao anybody who comes. So he sits there and he's, talking to his friends and, and he hears somebody laugh. So he turns to see and there's a girl and their eyes meet, but then he turns away. It's no point. So he is now talking to his friends. And then the girl crosses the room and she comes to him and she asks him, would you like to dance? Now everybody is like, it's the first time this has ever happened to anybody. And so Rupert, he's shocked too, and he gets up and he dances. And this time they have a very nice conversation. And it's a real conversation. All this time, nothing like this has ever happened in his life. He really feels a connect and an understanding with this girl. And he cracks a joke and she laughs, and she cracks a joke and he laughs. And my God, this is what he's really needed in his life. And so they meet and they talk, and this time he decides, I know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to take her home. That's it. Father se to milana hi nahi. So anyway, he delays it as much as possible. But then, she's a little hurt. She knows that he's an honorable person. He's taken two girls to meet his father. And is there something wrong? And doesn't he want a commitment? And so ultimately, he's like heartbroken because he knows ye bhi khatam hone wala hai. I mean, my father to jo chahte so chahte, but what can he do? He cannot insult her. And she's saying, I want to go home. I want to meet your father. And with all those negative things he's telling her about his father, she still wants to meet him. So he takes her home and she sits down and he looks at the father and the father says, okay, that's very nice. So let's give her a name, Janice. So he says, Janice, nice to meet you. And he says, Rupert, go and move that rock. So he says, should I dance with it? Should I take it on one finger? And what do you want me to do? Juggle? He knows this is all a failed enterprise. Whatever he does, his father will say something else. So anyway, but he said it and he can't be rude in front of her. So he goes and he starts trying to move it. And then the father says, pick it up and bring it here. And he, as if I could. And so he's, he knows he's not going to be able to do it, but he's trying. And then he sees another pair of hands. And there is Janice standing with him, leaning down, raising that rock with him. And between them, they are able to pick it up and carry it at least to the middle of the garden where it falls. And they're looking at each other and laughing. And his father's voice calls out to him and says, Rupert, that's the girl. you should marry. End of story.
Wonderful.
Yes. So, moral of the story. Yeah. So that's it. That's the way the story ends. So that was who
Beautiful.
asked me for it. I hope you're happy because that's an unrehearsed story. So I've told it once again. Okay. And meanwhile, I'm also going to look at. Good. I'm glad you liked it. I'm looking. Okay. Somebody's scared of wasting their time, being judged, to lose the people I care about. Okay, don't have a purpose, public appearance, losing people. Even just, I know I hate this feeling. Aditi, which feeling is that? To get stuck in place from where it is too hard, impossible. If I forget whatever I have learned, losing people, losing loneliness, very nice, acrophobia. All right, let me see what else, being judged. Okay, thank you very much for those nice comments. Yes, it's not my story. I really heard it and I loved it so much that I told my son, because I have a son. So I told him the story. This is how you will find who you want to marry. But take those fears. Now, Shabani, one of the things you'll notice is people have the same fears. Losing people I love, or loneliness. We all have the same fears. So if you take one of those fears of yours and write a story. Now, we don't have time today, but maybe the next time, or you can share it. Share that fear. Write a story around that. But think about that story. Where did that fear come from? Normally, it's come from something. So where did that fear come from? What is the problem it creates? But how can you resolve that fear? Just imagine, live the life that scares you. I mean, what I loved what they had done, Shampa and the department had done with the poster, because they had a very lovely line. What was that line on the poster? I hadn't given you that, but I really love that. What was that line, Mugdha? Live the life, something like that. It was a beautiful line. And I really am saying that live the life, you live your life as if it's a story, as if it's a quest. And whatever scares you, I'm not saying if it scares you to jump off a cliff, jump off a cliff. No, but other things that scare you. If it scares you to speak in public, speak in public. All right, commit yourself to doing things that scare you. Somebody said public appearance, and so I'm reminded of 40 Rules of Love, and Rumi and Tabriz. And one of the tests that Tabriz has for his disciples is go to a tavern and drink, in the pub. And nobody is willing to do that because badnaam honge na. They're supposed to be mystics. But badnaam hone ki bhi agar aapko dar chhoot jaye. So he makes, and Rumi can do that. Rumi has a very high position in his city, but he goes to the tavern and he sits with the drunkards. All right. And when he can do that, then he is free. So whatever the fear is, now none of those, I'm not asking you to go and sit in the tavern with drunkards. I am saying whatever your fear, can I come first in class? Can I speak up? Can I write? Can I, do this? Can I do that? Whatever your fear, but a positive fear, which will take you in the right direction, which will take you towards, there are two ways of going. So one is towards transcendence and going up, and the other is going down. So, when we're taking smoking or whatever, yes, we're scared of it, but it's going to take us down. It's going to be bad for our health. There's no point in going after that. You're good to be afraid. It's fine. But there are some things that is going to take us up. So, whether it's a sport that we want to follow, some things that will take us make us transcend, grow, evolve. Those are the things we're going to chase in our life. That's going to be the quest. Okay, any other questions? Because I think we're done with the session. Anxiety, feeling positive. I'm glad. Thank you for being here, because it's very different when I talk to young people. I get new energy. I get your energy. So did you find, Mugdha, what was that line you used? A beautiful line on the poster.
Great stories happen to those who tell them.
Very nice. I love that so much. I'm going to keep that and I'm going to write that down, or everybody write that down. Great stories happen to those who tell them. So think about stories. Think about your life as a story with a quest. Somebody asked me, what's your quest? Immortality would be nice if I could live forever. But if I cannot live forever, please God, let me at least feel like I've lived forever. So all these parts of life, art and storytelling and poetry and music, and let me experience everything that there is to experience before my time's out. So that's my quest. That's my meaning of life, is to make it as rich and have as much quality and depth as I can. So that's my quest. And with your wishes, that will happen. And so now it's for you to look for your quest. See, my quest is going to be different because of the age I'm at, but your quest has to be different. So you think about your quest and write that story and live it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a rejuvenating presentation.
Thank
Your
you.
art and content has actually reboosted our energy levels. We would look forward to have another session with you. But now, for now, I would like to invite Dr. Shampa Malhotra to sum up the session and to give a formal vote of thanks. I hope all the audience must have enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Vinita, for such a wonderful session. For long, I've been thinking of inviting Madam to the institution, but chalo, this virtual thing at least could go through. I'm very happy. Just as stories are unending, I'm sure, Vinita, will continue to have more sessions with you, and so that we can exchange a lot of stories together. Thank you so much, all my dear students, the other colleagues, teachers, and of course, my principal, Madam, who's also joined in. Thank you all. Vinita, we look forward to meeting you again and
Absolutely.
again.
And I want to hear the stories now these girls write.
Okay, sure.
Right. Yes.
Sure, we'll pass it on to you. Thank you so much.
No, we can have a session. Let's hear the stories someday.
Oh, yes.
We'll have a session of storytelling from students, ma'am, and we'll have you as a judge.
Oh, how lovely. Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.